Brzezinski. I'm the Director of Galleries here at Bradley University. And before we begin, can I just ask everyone to take a minute to turn off your cell phones or any devices you have. Tonight, I am pleased to introduce to you my colleague, Associate Professor of Photography, Margaret LeJeune. Margaret has been with the Department of Art and Design since 2012, and during her time here, Margaret has been a very, very engaged faculty member for our department. Of the numerous things that Margaret has done for the department and for the university, I would like to highlight a few exceptional projects. In 2017, Margaret hosted and organized the Midwest Society for Photographic Education conference here at Bradley University. This conference brought to our community renowned photographic professionals, and during the conference, lectures and workshops were hosted and exhibits were held throughout Peoria. Through her art and the environment class, she has worked with her students to advocate for and bring attention to pressing environmental issues and to educate the public on environmental and sustainability issues. This is manifested in the form of civic public art projects and collaborative installations at local partner organizations. She has also collaborated with the University Gallery program to organize and co-curate 2 juried exhibitions. These 2 exhibits prompted important discussions and raised awareness for the social issues that they explored and provided a platform for the artists involved. Off campus, Margaret has received many accolades and has been the recipient of grants, awards, and artist residencies. Her work has been published and exhibited widely. Margaret spent the 2018-2019 academic year on sabbatical. Currently on display in our Hartmann Center Gallery is Hold Fast, an exhibition featuring 5 bodies of photographic work that she created during her sabbatical. Tonight, following the lecture, from 6 to 7:30, we will hold a closing reception in the gallery. So if you have not yet been over to see this exhibition, this is your last chance. So please make sure to join us in the gallery to talk more with Margaret right after the lecture. And now, please help me welcome Margaret LeJeune.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you very much. So I'm going to read my talk tonight because I spent 14 months sailing and I had a lot of experiences that I'd love to share with you. If there's something that you'd like to know, please ask me a question after the talk or talk to me over at the reception later. First, I'd like to thank Erin for the support and help with installing my beautiful exhibition. Thank you to Gary Will, Department Chair, and Jeff Huberman, the Dean of the College, for supporting my sabbatical, and to my husband, Jeff, for accompanying me on life's great adventures. Okay. This is not a very exciting slide, I know, but hold on a second. So on May 8th, 2018, I packed the last box of my belongings into a 12 by 20 foot storage unit in North Peoria and turned in the keys to our apartment. Things were getting real. After 6 years of planning my sabbatical, it was actually beginning, and our only home was now a small sailboat. Pointing my 2010 Honda Accord east, I struggled to see out the back window of the car, which was filled to the brim with camera gear, quick dry clothing, a parlor-sized guitar, and a couple dozen books. As I rolled down the highway, I felt a huge sense of relief. All of the work that had gone into planning, from downsizing and selling a house, to learning nautical knots and navigational skills, was finally paying off. This was the beginning of a 14-month expeditionary sabbatical in which I would live aboard my 37-foot sailboat, named Bear, with my partner Jeff, and dive deep into my creative practice that investigates our relationship to the natural world. As an artist, I have a long history of expeditionary practice. Even during my days of environmental portraiture, I have always found a way to weave significant travel into my projects. For instance, with both the modern-day Diana and the Female Mariners Project, I made it a tenet of the projects to travel to any woman who agreed to let me make their portrait. This practice led me to many long weekends, living in my car, traveling the country in pursuit of the next image. I've been making work about water for the better part of the last decade. Water as a powerful force of nature, a place to recreate, a cleanser of both body and spirit, a holder of deep time, a thing that inspires awe, fear, and wonder, a precious resource, a giver of life. Within ourselves, we hold a version of the sea. Astrida Neimanis writes, and I quote, "We are all bodies of water in the constitutional, the genealogical, the geographical sense," close quote. In our bodies, we carry the elements of potassium, sodium, and calcium, which are combined in almost the exact same proportions of seawater. This evidence of a remote aquatic ancestor explains our inextricable call to the water, to a place familiar and comforting, while also challenging and largely unknown. Drawn to the parallels between the ephemerality of the surf and our own bodily existence, I seek to find meaning in the ways that humans interact with, and often seek to control water. Traveling by sailboat requires one to be intimately connected to the tides, to the weather, to the wind, and the seas. It has also caused me to reflect upon the notion that life, in a distant past, came from the sea, and that humans have sought ways throughout history to re-enter the ocean, physically, mentally, and imaginatively. During my night watch on a multi-day passage from Cape May, New Jersey to Cuttyhunk, Massachusetts, I gazed up at the stars, drawing their rotational pattern overhead, and thought about how our bodies, like the littoral zone, are temporary spaces shaped by water. The boundary between the land and sea is transient and fluid, as is the boundaries between the human life and the oceans. On sabbatical, I continued to explore our connection to the land and sea, to understand how our actions ripple across time and space, leaving indelible marks on our planet and our species. Living part-time aboard a boat the previous 5 years had planted seeds for a new way of working. Boat life had taught me to both be more flexible, to understand that plans are written in the sand at low tide, and that flexibility and spontaneity allow one to experience life more fully. So for this project, I set out with a set of questions in mind rather than a specific concept. These questions included, what can the landscape teach us? How do we come to understand a sense of place? What is deep time? What is resiliency? How can we know the earth better? What is an authentic experience with non-human beings, with the landscape, with ourselves? And how can one live a more sustainable life? You know, just a few simple questions. Today I'm going to share with you 4 stories from my sabbatical, because I can't share it all with you. Okay? The stories are going to weave together the ways in which I came to answer some of these questions, how I pursued travel as a means of inspiration, and how I developed the concepts for my creative practice. Part 1. At the beginning of my sabbatical, while Bear was still snug in a slip in Deltaville, Virginia, I flew to the UK for a residency with the global nomadic art project called the Ephemeral River. 17 artists from around the world were converged in southwest England to explore artistic responses to the River Dart in Devon, a waterway that flows from Dartmoor to Dartmouth. This is our group. I was the only artist invited from the United States to participate. And during the residency, I met several artists with whom I created collaborative projects. I worked with Haneen Conradi, a South African artist whose work also considers water, time, and environmental issues. As Haneen and I got to know each other, she shared with me some deeply personal story of her connection to the landscape. As a South African, her people have a complicated relationship with the British, one that involves decades of colonization and war that ravaged her home country. Her goal in this residency, in the country that was responsible for these deep cultural wounds, was to find a way to release generational trauma and cleanse hatred from her body. Together, we created a video work titled Dart, in which Haneen wades into the river to perform a ritual using her body to activate the water in its spiritual cleansing. In the final piece, she reads a poem that's called Deep River in both Afrikaans and in English. And I'm going to play you a short excerpt from that piece now. Captured by my drone, you can see the ripples reach the shore and sense the powerful transformation and metaphoric experience Haneen was having in the river.
oor donker stroom. Hoe lank het ek gewag, hoe lank gedroom. Die lem van liefde vroegend in my hart. In jou omhelsing eindig al my smart. Blus uit oor die rivier, die vlam van haat, die groot verlange wat my nooit verlaat. Ek sien van ver die glans van staal en goud. Ek hoor die sagte druis van waters, diep en koud. Ek hoor jou stem as fluistering in 'n droom. Kom snel oor die rivier, oor donker stroom.
On this residency, I also began to collaborate with Rachel Elaine, a British artist, lecturer, and PhD researcher at the University of Plymouth. Rachel is interested in analog film photography and examining phenomenology in relation to watery sites. Together, we created a multi-person performance on the riverbank in which participants use cyanotype photography to engage with the fleeting littoral zone. These are a few of the still images, which came to be a short video work in which recordings of the participants discussing notions of ephemerality are juxtaposed with cyanotypes made on the shoreline of the River Dart. When I returned to the boat, Rachel and I decided to pursue collaborative works via a film-based mail project. By documenting different watery locations, we considered how spontaneity and the unpredictable nature of double exposure could create works about climate change, sea level rise, and our relationship to the sea. Each of us shot 35mm film using underwater cameras, both above and below the surface of the water. We then shipped the films to each other and rewound the rolls and double exposed the frames over entirely new seascapes unknown to the other artist. The result is a series of images with compelling indexical traces that provoke questions about environmental issues, the impact of humans on the landscape, and the technical parameters of the photographic medium. Making these artistic connections early in my sabbatical set the tone for the remainder of the trip. When I left Peoria, I worried that I might miss opportunities for artistic engagement while living nomadically at sea. Artists need connection to thrive. We need one another for encouragement, for opportunities, for empathy, for amplification, and for criticism. These connections with Haneen and Rachel and the rest of the artists at the Global Nomadic Art Project help me to connect to new cultures, to new methods of working, and new ways of exploring environmentally themed works. Part 2. Once I returned to the States, Jeff and I spent the next several months sailing between the serene Chesapeake Bay and the rugged coast of Maine. Drawn to this landscape by the thousands of islands and picturesque anchorages, I spent the previous few summers documenting these spaces and thinking about the complicated and nuanced relationship between fisheries, tourism, conservation, and sustainability. The Maine coastline challenges sailors with significant tidal swings, with swift currents and an obstacle course of lobster pots. Despite these challenges, the rewards are epic. And I should tell you that that is me sailing bare in June or July, I think. And notice that I'm dressed in full foul weather gear, which is sort of like wearing a ski pant outfit. Secure and cozy anchorages, often without another boat in sight, invite sailors to drop the hook and enjoy the serenity. Whales, dolphins, and bald eagles make regular appearances, and the complexities of land life slip away. We spent the late summer and early fall anchorage hopping between Penobscot Bay and Mount Desert Island before it was time to head south to follow the weather. However, as we prepared to turn Bear around, we were confronted with a major obstacle. While single-handing our boat, Jeff experienced what a mechanic called catastrophic engine failure. A rod broke and torpedoed through the engine block, exploding oil all over the engine compartment. When this happened, I was driving south to an artist residency at the Hambidge Center in Georgia. When Jeff called to tell me the news, I had to pull over as tears threatened to fill up my rental car. All of our plans, literally years in the making, had been brought to a screeching halt. Even though we were traveling by sailboat, an engine is an essential safety feature for coming into tight harbors, outrunning bad weather, and navigating in strong currents. While people have certainly sailed without engines, we knew our trip was over if we could not fix the damage. And unfortunately, a repair was not an option. We needed a new diesel engine at the cost of our entire savings. I don't know about you, but when I face a major setback, it can take me down a really dark tunnel of despair. As I continued to drive for the 18 hours to Georgia, I felt the weight of this moment and many other dark and unchangeable moments from my past crushing down on me. Doubt, anxiety, and fear accompanied me when I arrived at the residency. How would I make work during this time of uncertainty and frustration? Should I abandon the residency and head back to the boat to help Jeff? How could I work under such duress? As I forced myself to unload my gear into the cabin in the picturesque Blue Ridge Mountains, I wondered if perhaps this time in the woods could help me rejuvenate both my mind and my body. While I knew that I would not be able to heal the irreparable damage to the engine, I knew that I needed to heal myself in order to make smart and reasonable decisions about how to move forward and possibly revise my sabbatical plans. With no cell phone service or internet in my small cabin, I was forced to let Jeff handle the boat issues. And if anyone knows me, that's not easy for me. After settling in and reading a handout about what to do if I saw a bear or a poisonous snake, in both cases, back away slowly, I thought about how I might make the most meaningful experience of this residency and how I might come to understand the surrounding landscape and history of this place. In an effort to understand the way in which people had lived in that area for the last few centuries, I visited the local museum and read several of the Foxfire publications. One of the things that stood out to me was the strong desire of the local residents to maintain a connection to traditional Appalachian culture through the founding tenets of pragmatism and self-reliance, this including a commitment to traditional folk medicine. Folk healing goes by many names, depending on where it's practiced, including the terms root work, folk medicine, folk magic, and my favorite, kitchen witchery. Southern Appalachian folklore modalities using plants, prayers, herbs, and dirt to heal illness, ward off evil, and protect homes meld European, African, and Native American influences. Many mountain healers in this region practice folk medicine through a strictly Protestant lens, believing that they were fulfilling a duty as Christ followers to heal those in need. They believed that their ability to use plants and prayers to heal the sick was a gift from the divine. As I leafed through the books in the museum shop, I realized that several of the plants used in the tinctures, compounds, and teas were actually growing in the landscape surrounding my cabin in the forest. These species included tickweed, snakeweed, goldenrod, wild mint, and purple aster. Protecting the land, including the plants, animals, and watershed, are paramount to a culture based on self-sufficiency. This balance of stewardship of the environment, including minimal harvesting of natural resources for medicine, food, and shelter, rather than seeking resources of the earth as products for prosperity and upward mobility, is a model that all of us should strive to adopt. I spent the remainder of this residency reflecting on how our ancestors understood the importance of biodiversity to both protect the land and heal the people. And over the next several weeks, I slowly and methodically created a visual index of these plants used in folk medicine through an alternative process called lumen printing. Working in this slow and unpredictable method, I was forced to give up control, a metaphor for my current situation with the boat. This photographic technique is one in which the chemical properties of the natural materials, in this case the flowers and the plants, combined with humidity, duration of exposure, and the age of the photographic paper, create unknowable color changes and forms through contact printing. In other words, the plant matter is placed in direct contact with the photographic paper, sandwiched between two sheets of glass and then exposed to sunlight. Exposure times for the images in the gallery that you'll see range from 20 minutes to about 6 hours. Once the exposure is complete, a purely aesthetic choice made by the artist, the print is placed in a black box to temporarily stabilize the image. However, if the print is exposed to light, it will continue to shift and change in unpredictable ways. As I relinquished control in this process, I also found myself letting go of the need to know what would happen next in my life. Through an open and unassuming artistic connection to the forest around me, I came to understand the history of this place and the resiliency of the Appalachian people. This artistic practice provided a sense of understanding both of a new place, a metaphor for healing, and a new appreciation of working in situations with unknowable outcomes. Of course, all of these ideas relate directly back to my life living on a boat. I'm happy to say that when I returned to Bear in Maine, Jeff and I were able to install a new diesel engine, funded in part by the generosity of collectors who purchased my work. This is me sending out prints. It's a very big smile on my face. Part 3. October and November of 2019 were filled with sailing adventures, punctuated with trips ashore to attend another artist residency in Canada, present an artist talk at a conference in Kentucky, and photograph hurricane destruction in Florida. During this time, Jeff and a friend sailed Bear 1,500 nautical miles from Virginia to the British Virgin Islands. And this is Bear leaving out of Virginia in some pretty nasty conditions. The nonstop trip took just shy of 2 weeks. While making long ocean passages, crew rotate watches, often on a schedule of 2, 3, or 4 hours apiece, in which they are responsible for the boat while the other person sleeps. Ashore, I provided weather routing to the crew via text messages on a small satellite communication device. Poring over weather models and analyzing the data, I helped the crew of Bear avoid potentially dangerous winds and high seas. The crew arrived in the British Virgin Islands tired, soggy, and in need of some serious showers. The boat performed very well on the journey and only needed some minor repairs and reprovisioning before we could set sail again. At the end of November, I had finished my duties ashore and flew down to the islands and helped Bear get back into cruising shape. After a short time at the dock, we were eager to get back out to sea. We island hopped for several weeks, enjoying the blissful sails between protected anchorages. At this point in my sabbatical, I was making work about a wide variety of ideas, including climate change and the power of the ocean to warn us of our hubris. Everywhere we dropped the hook, there was evidence of hurricanes Maria and Irma that had passed over the islands just a year before. Damage to the land and the sea were still visible at every turn. Hundreds of damaged boats, dilapidated buildings, sinking docks, and flattened homes dotted the landscape. Stories of survival passed through quivering lips at each and every beach bar. It was obvious and heartbreaking that we were witnessing a shared trauma affecting the people, the land, the sea animals. After a solid month of roaming around, I was more than ready to hunker down for a while in one place and spend some time thinking more deeply about those big questions I had posted at the beginning of my sabbatical. We decided to volunteer for the National Park Service as bay host at Leinster on the North Shore of St. John. That was my home for 2 months. We helped the park with this program, get this program of bay hosts back up and running after being shut down from the hurricane. Our duties included greeting new boaters who came into the bay and hikers who hiked in at least 2 miles from the nearest road. From the moment that we sailed into Leinster, I knew that I had arrived somewhere very special. After securing Bear to a mooring ball near the shore, I quickly suited up into my snorkel mask and fins and jumped off the boat and into the depths of myself. Exploring under the surface of the sea, I came face to face with a myriad of species, including giant tarpon, barracuda, sharks, stingrays, octopus, cowfish, eels, sea turtles. Their curiosity mirrored mine as we checked out each other's fins, skins, and movements. Living with these inquisitive and ingenious creatures day in and day out for several months brought a new appreciation and understanding of animal intelligence. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, one of my big questions was how we can have an authentic experience with the ocean. I've tried to visualize this concept in several different ways, and looking in the ways that we recreate on the water, including the documentation of cruise ships in ports, in imaging the ways which we engage and control and capitalize on captive animals from the sea, in thinking about our desire to know the sea as both a place of scientific discovery, as well as a place that is largely unknown and awe-inspiring. How could a place so beautiful and peaceful looking not inspire rejuvenation, clarity of mind, and creativity? This well-protected cove surrounded by lush green hills and rocky outcroppings shooting out of the sea is reminiscent of a travel brochure for sure. However, it was the island's complicated past that created the most intrigue for me. Once covered in pristine native plants, this area of St. John was clear-cut to create a lucrative sugar plantation in the 18th and 19th centuries. Slave labor was used to farm the inhospitable land, and as many as 600 slaves worked at the Annaberg plantation on the north-facing slope of the island. Many slaves tried to escape by swimming across the channel to what is now the British Virgin Islands. Living in the bay, literally in the shadow of the plantation ruins, was very strange. I felt conflicted. The facade showed a landscape of captivating flora and fauna, yet the soil held deep scars in memorial to human and environmental sacrifices of the past. Several slave revolts occurred on the islands in the 18th and 19th centuries. One important uprising occurred in the Dutch-controlled territory that would become the USVI. Fed up with abysmal working conditions and strict labor laws, slaves set fire to houses, sugar fields, and storage facilities at roughly 50 plantations in one day. The uprising was spearheaded by 3 women slaves, Mary Thomas, Axeline Elizabeth Solomon, called Agnes, and Matilda McBean, locally known as the Queens. Immediately after the rebellion, court-martials were established. 12 people were given a death sentence and immediately shot. 39 others were given a death sentence and sent to Copenhagen. However, 34 of them later had their sentences commuted to hard labor, and the last 5 imprisoned with hard labor for life. Among the latter were the 3 queens. This story lingered with me as I sought ways to make work about the islands. These images are taken at the top of the lookout point where the remains of the plantation owner's home stood. We referred to this place as our office, as we would hike up there each morning to try to get cell service. From this point, one has a clear view of the surrounding islands and waterways, a strategic place to build a home if you want to keep an eye on your property and your workers. Lining the trail up to the outlook are dense and thorny bushes called catch and keep, also known locally as country policemen or hug me close. In the summer, the plant blooms small white fuzzy dots that appear on the end of new growth, and they attract pollinators like bees and butterflies. Pretty to view from a distance, the vine-like tendrils are covered in hundreds of hooked spines, a plant aptly named for its ability to hook onto and hold into anything. I photographed the catch and keep thinking about the ways that I could make work that would represent the intrigue and beauty of the place. I had no idea what I would make with these documentary photographs until I returned to campus nearly 6 months later. For all of my photo students right now, I always say you should carry a pop-up reflector with you. This is why. In the exhibition, you'll see 3 cyanotype soft sculptures in the form of dresses. This foundational shape is indicative of the simple cotton garments worn during the Dutch colonization of the islands. The fabric is prepared with light-sensitive solution that I then printed with vines of the catch and keep bush. Inspired by my interest in the environmental history of the islands, the story of the 3 queens, and my transformative experience in this place, these works ask the viewer to consider a multidimensional understanding of the Caribbean territory. Part 4. After finishing our stint as bay hosts, we left Leinster Bay and continued to explore the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the Turks and Caicos, and the Bahamas. After docking Bear in Florida and making a quick trip to Ireland to give a talk at the Art in the Anthropocene conference at Trinity College in Dublin, I took off on my last adventure. A cross-country drive from Florida to the North Woods for an artist residency at the University of Notre Dame's Environmental Research Center, which I'll refer to as UNDERC from this point forward. This incredible facility houses over 600 acres of land and 30 lakes and bogs, and it lies on both sides of the Michigan and Wisconsin border. The species diversity in this protected area is rich, with residents including black bear, gray wolf, bobcat, flying squirrels, ermine, river otter, and porcupine. I saw a porcupine that was about this tall. It was absolutely incredible. At first I thought it was a dog, and then I realized very quickly it was not, and I turned away. However, the creature that I was most interested in finding was the boreal chickadee. This particular bird is of interest because it is a non-migratory species of the boreal forest, one of the largest carbon sinks on the planet. Carbon sinks pull carbon out of the atmosphere and stash it away. This is very important. A lot of discussion about stopping global warming focuses on reducing carbon emissions. This is a very good idea. We need to keep carbon that is locked up in the forest out of the atmosphere in order to stay below the 2 degrees of global warming, which scientists agree is critical threshold for our life on Earth as we know it. Each year, clear-cutting across the boreal forest releases more than 26 million metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The boreal chickadee, a small songbird with a husky body, brown cap, small black bib, and white cheeks, is a year-round inhabitant of the boreal forests. It nests in coniferous trees, usually spruce and balsa fir that are near wood. Not near wood, near water. These birds forage by agilely hover gleaning. Think about sort of this action, okay, at the tips of branches. The current population is a mere 5.2 million individuals, where 40 years ago the population was over 20 million. Excessive logging, drilling, and mining has threatened mature boreal forests. Again, this is the habitat of those cute little birds. Another probable factor in species population decline is climate change. At the species' southernmost range, a minor 1 or 2 degrees in temperature can, over time, reduce the amount of boreal habitat. With smaller areas of boreal forest available, the chickadee population will decline further as the bird retreats to Canada in search of suitable habitat and food. Currently, the species is listed as a bird of special concern by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Although much of the boreal forest, the northern boreal forest, has been spared from development, the southern portion of the forest, here in the United States, has experienced heavy alteration from logging, mining, hydroelectric development, oil and gas extraction. During my residency, I spent my days roaming the edges of the Underk Preserve, documenting human impact on the landscape and considering the challenges to the tiny chickadee. As I contemplated ways to visually convey ideas of habitat and species loss, I thought about how the loss of habitat will silence this unique and beautiful call of the bird. In the final works, I superimpose bird call sound waves over the photographic documentation to mimic the silent plight of this avian species. Conclusion. I returned to campus in August as a transformed artist educator, eager to continue my expeditionary work, share experiences with my students and colleagues, create more collaborative projects, and continue to make visible the interconnectedness of all things. I am still pursuing the answers to those big questions I posed at the beginning of my trip, and delight in the rewards and challenges from this learning process. I'd like to conclude my talk today with just a few numbers for the more analytic members of the audience. I call this sabbatical by numbers. The ones that I think are most interesting up there are, we volunteered 320 hours. We read approximately 126 books aboard the boat. We watched only 3 movies the whole time we were gone. I only crashed my drone once, and it survived, and thanks to my husband, we found it, which was great. He climbed up the hill and got it. I took 7 flights, attended 4 artist residencies, developed 6 collaborative projects with other artists, gave 2 conference presentation talks, attended 2 conferences where I gave talks. I gave 6 artist talks. I had to make 3 sail repairs. I logged 16 terabytes of videos and photographs. That's why I said I had to read the talk today, otherwise who knows where I might have went. We spoke 3 languages. We traveled by boat 5,630 miles. I traveled by plane 16,142 miles, and I drove alone in a car for 3,693 miles. And I'm happy to be back here sharing this all with you today. Thank you for coming. I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
How do you get into doing stuff like this?
So if you had asked me 8 years ago if I would ever to make an overnight passage on a sailboat, I probably would have laughed. And then I got married to a man who sailed. And we got married because we're both very adventurous people. And he said, I love to travel. And I said, so do I. And he said, I like to travel by boat. And I said, I like to travel by car, but let's find a compromise. And so we both sail and we drive lots of places. Yeah.
Were you, looking at this list, were you conflicted with your carbon footprint?
Absolutely, absolutely. Actually, today I was trying to figure out what would my carbon footprint have been. And if I hadn't flown anywhere, my carbon footprint would have been tiny, right? I believe it's something like every year Americans are responsible for 21 metric tons of carbon. And in a sailboat, we live very much off the grid. We get most of our power from our solar panels that you saw in the first image of our boat and off of the alternator when we have to run our engine. Other than that, we use very little fuel and we use the wind to power us. And so, yeah, it's a very different experience as far as an environmentalist to live on a boat. Makes me feel better about myself. Yeah.
Will you make a movie?
Oh, I certainly have the terabytes worth of data to do that. So this is not some sort of weird shameless plug, but my husband and I do have a blog with a bunch of video work on it. It's called Return to Seasons. That reflects our interest in sailing and following the weather, right? Following the food that goes with that weather, to be better stewards of the earth. We have a lot of videos on there about our sailing, and we are years behind catching up with all of the footage we've taken. But maybe we should do a feature length. Yeah.
After taking such a long trip and then coming home with this incredible amount of work, can you talk just a little bit about the process after when you're now sitting with the work and figuring out how it exists in exhibition form or publication, and maybe just a little bit about how one sits with these large bodies of
Yeah.
work over time?
Yeah, I sort of think of the exhibition that's up in Hartmann right now as a sketch. There's so much work to go through. There's so many connections to make amongst the different projects. I certainly see a book in the future because many of the images need a bit of text to explain context. But as I sit with the work and as I look through it more and more and more, I think of more ideas, right? It's like you get the ball rolling and it just doesn't stop. And I realize now why people take sabbaticals. This is my first one and I feel so energized. I mean, I have so many ideas of new artistic endeavors and new ways of making them. Yeah, this was just a real gift. Yeah.
What's a sabbatical?
So yeah, that's a great question. A sabbatical is the opportunity of a faculty member who has attained tenure to take some time away from teaching to go work on their research. And it's supported in part by the university. Yep, it's a really great part of being a professor. Yeah.
So how much of it do you think about the human beings that are tied to the place? So clearly in the Virgin Islands, you're thinking about the three queens and human beings that are tied there. Clearly in the Appalachians, you're thinking about the human beings and how they're tied there with what they do with the plants and how that's important. How you think about the human beings in the chickadee bird in that area and how they're tied there. Is it only a negative impact, humans there?
Actually, I really think about that space as, it's a protected environment, right? It's this like a research station that the university has, purchased and decided to keep as a space to protect these species that are in this area. So I think about our ability as humans to be giving and kind to the environment through places like that. And I think about the opportunities that we have to connect the dots, right? And really think about the interconnectedness of, we talk a lot about plastic straws right now and, how we can make an impact on the environment. Everything is interconnected. Every choice that we make reflects upon the earth. And so when I'm at these different places, I'm thinking about how have humans affected this space, right? How have we changed the species that are growing there? How have we affected the plants that are there, that are currently there, or the animals that are currently there? And how can we do better, right? That's my ultimate question.
So originally, those first images where you said you drove all over to take pictures of women doing stuff,
Yep.
right? Like, that's very human-oriented,
Mhm.
but it seems like over time it's shifted, but the humans still have a role, like,
Sure.
expand just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
How the shift occurs.
Sure. Before I came over here today, Paul said, are you going to talk about your entire career as an artist? And I thought, oh my goodness, no one wants to hear all of that. But when I don't say first, but the early part of my career, I was an environmental portrait artist. So I made pictures of people in specific spaces, right? In specific places that spoke about perhaps their jobs or the things that they like to do, right? Like the women hunters, the Female Mariners Project. And so I was really invested in people. And then I started sailing, and I realized the joy in being out in nature and actually sometimes disconnecting a little bit. And I started really thinking about my impact on the environment personally, and how could I speak with other people about that. And I thought that connecting those dots through photographs, right, through the artistic practice, would give other people a means of thinking about their own impact on the environment. So that's the sort of transition that I made. Yeah.
Do you feel as if, like, now that you're taking pictures of nature as well as, like, nature in conjunction with humans, that you are starting to make this connection that we are nature? Completely, right? When people say humans and nature, I go, oh no, that's the same thing. We are the same thing, right? I think a lot about, and I read a lot about how, just again, this interconnectedness of the planet, right? About ecology, right? And how if you remove one creature, right? In my class we talk about trophic cascades. You remove this one species and the whole cascade falls apart, right? It affects the entire landscape, the watershed, everything. And so I think a lot about what I do and how my actions affect everything, the environment, the planet. Yeah.
What were the three most memorable books that you read?
Oh my goodness. Okay, let's see. The first one that comes to mind is a book called Lime, and this is a new project I hope to work on. I've been really interested in this idea of indicator species, right? Things that tell us perhaps how the environment is changing around us. They're indicators of what's changing, maybe with climate change. And I've been reading a lot about disease and Lyme disease as it's shifting across the country. And I'm trying to find visual ways to address that idea. I also read 4 Rachel Carson books, right? At the Edge of the Sea Around Us. Can't remember what the other 2 were right now. But those had a real strong impact on me, thinking about how to visualize and document the sea. I can make really beautiful pictures of sunsets all day long, but that doesn't really speak about the issues that I want to address. And so doing the reading really helps to flesh out some of the ideas for me. That counts as 6 books, right? I'm trying to think what else was. I started reading Omnivore's Dilemma.
yeah, the whale, so many things, yeah. Have I turned anyone on to sailing? We're always looking for crew. Are there any other questions? I really appreciate you all coming. Yeah. What's that?
What of the future?
What of the future?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm so glad someone asked that. I came prepared. So what am I working on next, or what of the future? Maybe you have seen that in the past few years I've been making work using bioluminescent organisms to create photographs. These are dinoflagellates, which are tiny like plankton-like creatures that float in the ocean and cause red tide, but they also make this beautiful bioluminescent glow. And so I've been utilizing these, but I couldn't have a lab on my boat. And so this project sort of went dormant while I was gone. But when I got back, I started working with a new type of creature. It's called an ostracod. It's about the size of a sesame seed, and it's in relation to a shrimp and a crab. It's very, very small, though. And I am reanimating desiccated organisms, and I'm now using them to draw with bioluminescent light on photographic film. And I'm trying to find ways that I can address climate change, again, because these creatures are living in the ocean water that is changing with the, change in ocean acidification or temperature change. And so they're moving around the planet because of those changes. And they are also part of, the warming ocean is a part of the reason that we have more hurricanes occurring, more weather events. And so I'm trying to think about ways that I can visually create a dialogue about some of these issues using these bioluminescent organisms. And I'm also still thinking about indicator species. I captured fireflies, and I'm having them walk on top of the photographic film. Fireflies are in steep decline all around the world because of light pollution and the use of pesticides. And so something that we used to think of very warmly as a joy of our childhood could be something that the next generation doesn't get to experience at all. And so this is the new work that I'm working on while I'm still trying to edit those 16 terabytes of photographs that I have. Yeah.
When you were in the Bermuda Triangle, did you ever bump into anybody from a different time zone? Hemingway or anybody?
When you're out at sea for a really long time, you start seeing things, and it's no joke, and you hear things, and these ideas of like mermaids and sirens, the ideas are very real. I'll just say that. Okay, yeah, oh, yeah.
Can you reiterate on that a little bit? You said you heard things with your interview?
So I did not sail to the Bermuda Triangle. My husband did, but we did do several overnight, multi-day passages where I was on the boat. And it takes your body a while to adjust to the motion of the sea. Everyone gets seasick. Like, don't think that just because I sail all the time, I don't get seasick. For the first 48 or 72 hours, you are sick. And while I don't physically get sick, I feel very off. And I start to hear things all the time. It's very bizarre. It's the cheapest drug there is out there, and you get to see beautiful things. Right? Okay, if you have other questions, I'd be happy to answer them over in the gallery. Thanks again for coming.